Okay. This is it. This is the one. We're going to have to let it be whatever it's going to be. Because you just decided to hit the play button. And that's no small thing. Given the infinite choices that you have right now for audio-visual stimulus that you could be listening to, that you're choosing to tune into this, it means a lot. So I just need to get over myself and make it happen. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown, and I am very grateful to you, whoever you are, whether you're a new person or you're a returning friend. I'm really appreciative that you're here. But I am struggling today, my friends. I am struggling to make this frickin' intro happen. Very often, those of you who are longtime listeners know, I don't have a hard time here. I come in, it's often one take, often the first take, just flows right out of me. I don't even think too much about it. But right now, I'm looking at my recorder, and this is literally the 19th time that I've hit record and then stop because I didn't like how it was going. And I think I'm exhausted. And I'm having a hard time finding a groove. If you were here last week, you know my wife had a surgery. She's doing fine, but she still doesn't have the thing off of her wrist. We're taking her in this week for that. So I'm still having to do a lot at home that she's usually taking care of on top of my already considerable workload. Not to mention, yesterday they just announced that they're reinstating some of the quarantine restrictions that had been loosened. And that's weighing heavy on me. I'm just feeling depleted. My apologies, I don't mean to dump that off on you. It's not your fault, but it's the truth. And I have to imagine that a lot of you out there are exhausted as well, which is ironic given that we've shut things down and there's sort of less activity in so many areas, but it's still exhausting. It's exhausting to be trapped and worried and seeing the news reports of the case counts going up and the second wave and the hospitals getting overwhelmed in places, whether that's where you are or not. And then the continued bullshit of our president trying to overturn the election. It's all just too much. And then to have it be again, we're shutting down. It's just, oh man. I think what really set me off was earlier today, I watched my youngest daughter try to take her dance class via Zoom meeting. And this dance class that she's been going to on Saturdays, it's her favorite thing right now. There's only 5 kids in the class. The room that they've been doing it is this big room. The teacher's wonderful. But, they shut everything down again yesterday, so they had to do it via Zoom today. And the teacher's internet connection was having issues, so she was freezing up. And I was looking at my daughter's face and it just crushed me. And I know, we gotta hang in there. We gotta continue to try to follow the advice of the public health officials because we're all in this together and we gotta get through. And they've announced that there's a vaccine now. So, supposedly we're gonna get through this. But for now, we're still freaking in it. And it's like, And I had planned to share with you a talk today that was a little bit of a transition to some body stuff and some pain stuff, but I've decided to put that off for one more week. And instead, I'm going to share with you a talk today that I recorded with a podcast listener a few weeks ago named Elisa Malinverni. And you'll forgive me if I just mutilated your name, Elisa. I keep forgetting to ask people how to pronounce it when I record with them, but I'm betting she won't mind because she's a longtime podcast listener, and you'll hear it was like I was talking to an old friend. And the conversation essentially amounted to like dealing with COVID fatigue, like with what I'm talking about today. And also just maybe some of the differences between what's happening where she is in Switzerland and where I am here, but also the things that are the same, even just in terms of what yoga teachers are facing and the choices that they're making in this new situation. So it felt like the right conversation to listen to today. We'll get to that other stuff next week. But I'm very excited for you to hear this conversation with Elisa because it felt really good to me to have it, and I'm hoping that you'll get a similar feeling of camaraderie and friendship as well. Before we get to that, though, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the passing of Rama Jyoti Vernon. Maybe you know who Rama Jyoti is. Maybe you don't. She was on the show, and I have gone ahead and freed up that episode from the premium podcast subscription. So it's episode 156, and it's now available again on the public feed. And I encourage you to go back and listen to it. I did not know Rama Jyoti in person, but that one conversation I had with her was hugely significant. She's somebody who played a pivotal role in the way that yoga came to the West and to America. And, you know, that conversation I had with her, again, was very significant when she expressed, you know, some regrets she had about how things went, but also just kind of the heart of intention, and just, she's a really significant person in the yoga world, and she passed this last week. So my condolences to all of her friends and family, and I do encourage you guys to go back and listen to episode 156 with her if you haven't already. Speaking of which, let me express some thanks to our podcast premium subscribers. Specifically, this week, Catherine Mercer and Margaret Dugan. We are very grateful to people like Catherine and Margaret who've chosen to be podcast premium subscribers. Not only do you get access to the full archives, but it's really the way that people are helping support this show, and it makes a huge difference. It allows us to keep doing it the way that we've been doing it. And we do have a choose your rate system, and also if you can't afford it, just email us and we will give you a free account. But if you can afford to contribute something, boy, are we grateful. To learn more about becoming a podcast premium subscriber, along with all of my other stuff, you'll hear in today's conversation with Elisa, I reference the Yoga of Business class that we've been doing, and that is ongoing. You can find out about that Yoga of Business class along with my live stream classes and the teacher's call and all of my stuff, including podcast premium subscription. Everything can be found at jbrownyoga.com. Okay, y'all, that's going to be it. I'm going to just trust that it was enough. And like I said, we're just going to let it be what it is. And I'll touch base with you for a moment on the other side. But for now, let's go ahead and get to it. Let's listen to this conversation that I had with Elisa Malinverni. Hello? Are you there?
I am here. Hi, Jay.
Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. It's been a good day. Friday the 13th, so I didn't have too high expectations.
That's true. And for me, it's also my youngest daughter's 6-year birthday today. She's born.
Oh, no way. Happy birthday.
I wasn't even thinking of it as Friday the 13th. I was just thinking of it as her birthday, but it is Friday the 13th. It's true.
It's true. It's also the end, they tell me, of Mars retrograde. So things should be getting better now.
I don't know a lot about astrology, but there certainly seems like there's times where I feel like there's certain universal things that are happening in the stars that are affecting me. And those like periods of retrograde, you can feel them.
Yeah. No, I don't know a lot about it. I don't want to come off as someone who knows a lot about astrology, not at all. But I was just listening to another podcast
How dare you? No, I'm kidding.
How
of
dare
course.
I? Well, I have to say yours is my favorite,
You
which
didn't
is
have to
why
say
I'm
that.
a
I
little
was teasing.
nervous. No, I'm serious. I'm serious. I listen to 2 podcasts, and yours is one of them. And yeah, I listen to it every week, usually while I'm running. And no, absolutely. That's why I'm very excited and also a little bit nervous because English is not my first language. So I hope it's going to go over well.
Well, I wouldn't have known that if you didn't say that. But I also...
sometimes you can hear a little bit of an accent after a
That's
while.
okay. That's okay. Well, you have to forgive me because my memory is really foggy. And
No worries.
I have been to Bern.
Oh, you have?
Oh, I've been to Bern, Switzerland more than once, maybe 2 times, maybe even 3,
No
2
way.
times. Yeah, I have a friend. Her name was Suzanne from, what was it, Bikini Dance?
I know her. Yeah, she's a faithful student of Mark Whitwell's. Are we still allowed to say the name? Yes, we are.
I don't
think.
know. No, and I don't know if she would still describe herself as that. I don't know. I haven't talked to her in a while.
Actually, you know what? They did a retreat with him last summer in Gstaad, which is, a mountain town near Bern. So they still had him.
I know that was before a bunch of stuff happened.
That was before?
At the beginning of the year.
Okay.
A bunch of stuff happened at the beginning of the year. If you don't know about it, that's fine.
No, I do know about it.
Oh, yeah, you listen to the podcast. You know,
so
but
of course.
I suspicion that might have been before that. I don't know. But I did actually go to that same retreat place in the Swiss mountains. And it was amazing.
So you know the area.
Yeah, and she lives in Bern. But we haven't met in person, was what I was going to ask. We only know each other through the podcast and emails. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Well, it's because
I wasn't around these people much.
I like it because you were talking to me just now since we got on together in such a immediate way that I thought, oh, maybe we've met when I was in Bern.
No, but I'm so used to listening to your voice. I just jumped right in.
That's it. You see, you listen to the podcast every week. That makes me so happy. That's so cool. Well, the other thing is, you sent me, I think it was you sent me an email. It was some while back, or someone did, about that post that you did on Medium, which was a while back. It was, I think you posted it in April.
That was at the beginning of the or in the middle of the Swiss lockdown. The one about free online yoga.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Yeah,
and
that's that one.
I filed it away and put you on a list to bring you on the show when I saw it because...
Oh, wow.
Because the article, because you were in another country, it seemed like there was all these stories about, how bad the U.S. is doing with the pandemic. And it's certainly true. We have an atrocious response.
Yes.
But it's horrible.
I feel for you.
It's so bad. But what I was thinking is that as I had been traveling throughout the world before this happened and I could no longer travel, I often had this feeling like even when I was in different cultures, and there was definitely different scenes, there was different things that were happening in different countries. It wasn't the same everywhere. On some level, there were certain universal things that yoga teachers were dealing with no matter where you were.
Yes, absolutely.
And so when I read your article about what was going on when the pandemic hit and the centers were closing down and teachers were jumping online and people were giving all these classes away for free, it was exactly what was happening here. And I was like, well, there you go. Even though we're horrible, still some of the same stuff's happening in Switzerland too. So I guess I'm curious first, just off the bat, what are things like there now? I know you wrote that back in April. So what are things looking out like right now where you are?
You know what? It's funny because when you first replied to my email, Switzerland was actually, in terms of coronavirus infection rates, was actually in a really good place. We thought we'd done really well because, of course, spring was bad, but then we were in lockdown for 6 weeks. 6 weeks? Yeah. And then gradually, hairdressers and massage therapists started reopening, and they did this gradual reopening. And then in the summer, it was almost things weren't normal, but we were moving around pretty freely and there were no masks. And we thought, we thought we'd done really well. Like the Swiss are, we think, we are known for precision and discipline and playing by the rules. And so, we felt pretty secure. And then around 4 weeks ago, the infection rates really started surging again, so much so that when was that? End of October. Yeah, about 3 or 4 weeks ago, they started imposing more rigorous measures again. And now we are back in that state where we are fearing every press conference by the federal council. And now the cantons, which are the states in Switzerland, have started taking their own measures. So because Switzerland is quite small, and so you can easily travel from one state to the other. So you know, in where I'm at in Bern, which is the capital, so we have masks in all indoor spaces and in smaller, even outdoor spaces, because we have these arcades in the old town. But if you travel a little further east, it's entirely different, and the theaters are still open, and you can still go see a movie. And so, yeah, that's very confusing. Mm-hmm. And in terms of yoga, I think we've been quite lucky. So we were allowed to reopen. Studios were allowed to reopen mid-May, but only with 4 students per class. Like there was a limit on all types of gatherings to 5 people. So it was the teacher and 4 students, which of course, if you have, you know, large overhead, it's like, okay, should I even reopen? But then they changed that regulation to, you have to have at least 4 square meters per student, and then you just make a calculation based on the space on the surface that you have, and then you can take XY students. So that's what we've been doing until recently, and now, recently it was suddenly okay. Everyone has to be wearing a mask just to, you know, come into the studio and be in the changing room, and as soon as they're on their mat, people can take off the mask.
I know we have that same thing here, but does that really make sense? I don't know. It's so confusing.
It is. Well, yeah, yes and no. And now some people say that the state says you should keep the mask even during practice, but the federal government says, no, you don't have. Yeah, so it's basically.
Yeah.
It's confusing.
That's what I mean. What I would say is we are basically, where I am here in Pennsylvania, paralleling some of what you just said, although it seems like we're a little bit behind you. So definitely over the summertime, we also, where I live in my county, we're not seeing increases of cases. We weren't having any deaths for like some weeks. Like we were kind of like feeling like we had done a good job here, even though we were right near New York, where things really got out of control for a moment there. So we thought we had done really good, but then just now, like literally in the last week, there's this big uptick happening.
Yeah. Well, it's the flu season. I mean, all kinds of viruses are having.
I guess, but it's
party right now.
So you just starting to feel like, oh man, are we going to have to do these measures again? Like you guys have had to. And there's just such an anxiety, like again.
Yeah. And that's something I'm feeling and observing very strongly. It's like you just said, again, because we've done it all,
Yes.
And
you're the ones who actually play by the rules.
People are good at following rules.
I mean, I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean that in a good way. Like you don't have the dumb assholes or whatever. Like, I don't know. Forgive me. I just shouldn't have said that. That's not fair.
Well, we have feel like, it's really interesting because the more conservative states and politicians are actually very much like the U.S. Republicans who are like, no, we're not wearing masks. And that's actually one region where the numbers really started spiking again because they were still having their folklore festivals without wearing masks. And it was like 100 people in one place without a mask, and people were singing and dancing. And so we have those people too.
I'm sure you do, but I know that when I traveled there, I just felt like, you have universal health care, and
we do.
There's a sense of like civic duty or something. I don't know. There's just definitely like a more civilized feeling to Switzerland, and maybe that's a cliche, but it's certainly a cliche for a reason in my experience.
That's true. And if you'd asked me a few weeks ago, I would have told you that in the spring, I was very impressed by how our government our government handle things, and I thought they did a really good job. And but yeah, now
Even
certain
still, though,
new information is emerging.
they can't control the virus completely. So at least you get information from them and you feel like that, like they're giving you accurate information. I don't know if you feel that way, but that's the problem here.
Yeah, but you see, that's the thing. There was this incident in Switzerland in the spring. The government wasn't prepared and there weren't enough masks for the whole population. And for weeks, they kept saying, oh, there's really no scientific evidence for, that masks really protect you against infection. And that's true, by wearing a mask, you protect others, but that's something at least. Yeah. And so they kept saying with the disinfectant it was saying, they kept saying, oh yeah, washing your hands is just as effective, which is also true. But the truth was that they hadn't done their shopping, so there weren't enough masks for the whole population, and they wanted to avoid a stampede. And instead of admitting that, the government kept making these excuses, and now we're at a point where masks are mandatory in all public spaces. So clearly that wasn't entirely true what they kept preaching in the spring. So there's this new element of not quite trusting the government.
Interesting. Well, I know that some people I've talked to about that, they say, well, the science evolves and we thought one thing and now we think another thing, but
which is certainly true. I mean, this is
do you have like testing? Like, does everybody get tested? Is there any kind of that tracing and tracking stuff that they're doing in some places?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it's a little bit crazy. Yeah, of course now there's much more testing than there was in the spring, and they've just this week or last week they introduced these quick tests, like quick swaps, where you can get a result within like an hour or something.
Yeah.
So there's certainly more testing, and maybe that's one reason why the numbers are also higher.
I don't know. Testing. Well, that's also the thing. Again, let me just first say, there's certainly, like, I just talked to my friend in Idaho, and where they are, like, their hospitals are overrun. Oh, so God. Like, there's definitely like, this illness definitely kills people. So let's just say that. But at the same time, I don't really like everything about Elon Musk. He's a very controversial guy, and there's a lot of things that I don't agree with that I've seen him kind of say. But he tweeted this thing about how he had taken 4 of these rapid tests that you just talked about. Like he did 4 tests in one day and had them all go through the same person, the same machine, and 2 came back positive and 2 came back negative. And he said, there's a problem with that. And people got so mad at him. And I understand. They're like, why are you putting that out there? We're supposed to be encouraging people to follow by rules so we can put this thing, we can all work together in this. And I get that. But at the same time, from a purely logical standpoint, if I take 4 tests in one day and they all go through the same process and 2 say I'm positive and 2 say I'm not, how do I know if I'm positive or not?
Yeah. Which is what makes you question whether this isn't just a big circus.
It's confusing because there is actual people getting sick. I don't deny that, but then there's all this other stuff happening, and just I don't know. Oh God! So right now, are all the centers closed again?
It's really, and that's what's so interesting these days, because I feel like in the spring we were kind of all more on the same page-ish. And now there's like the centers. So I'm, all the larger centers in Bern, I'm friends with the owners. So I know them fairly well. And there's like this one center that's owned by a guy who's like very progressive, and he's keeping it open. They do some hybrid classes, but they're still teaching in person. And then one center, which is owned by a woman who's, very, very cautious. And she herself is more kind of like the anxiety-driven personality. Like she's like a few weeks ago, she shut down everything and she only teaches online, or she has her teachers only teaching online. Right. So it's very like varied right now, but we are allowed to be open. And like I said, you have to have that square meter or square footage amount around your mat, and masks, and of course wash your hands when you come in and wash your hands when you leave. And but we are allowed to teach in person, which for me personally, I was teaching online a lot during our first lockdown in the spring. And now it's really important to me to still teach in person, even if only a handful of people can come. But I really feel like we need, even if it's just, that tiny snippet of feeling your community around you and being in the same field of energy, I will at least have that, and I'll do it for as long as I can.
I really hear you. Because I haven't had any opportunities really. I had one opportunity at the end of last month to have a very small group of people, like 5 people, 6 people. It was so good, after all these months, because I think a lot of people are having to negotiate some of what you were talking about. I don't know. It seems like maybe you guys weren't as locked down for as long. Like some of the centers here don't have the option to open yet.
Yeah, I know. And to hear you say month, I can't even imagine that.
I mean, we're talking like 7 months at this point. Although I do think that there are some places like here in Pennsylvania where you can, like you're saying, where you are legally allowed to open with cautions and, taking into account all the guidelines. And a lot of centers have done that. First, they were doing outdoor classes, but now it's gotten colder. So they've brought them in with these, the precautions like you described. But then there's that, like you can do it, but then it's if people feel comfortable enough. And like you said, if your space isn't that big, it might not be, I don't know, worth it. Although worth it financially is one thing, worth it for your soul is another thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, I guess it really does come down to like people's leases and like you said, the overheads you're having to contend with. I don't know if any places there got like any relief or they were only closed for 6 weeks, and that's not crazy. It's when you have to be, not operating in-person classes for months and months that I think it sort of starts to feel like impossible.
Yeah, but most landlords weren't that accommodating, and also it was like really bad timing because you just had to close in the spring, which is, at least in Switzerland, that's still like a good time for yoga. And then as soon as the days get warmer, people, not those that are really committed, but a lot of people stop coming because they want to be outside. And so that's when we were allowed to reopen. And then the fall came, which is usually a good time again, like between September and, I guess it's the same everywhere in the world, between September and November, December, you make really good money. And now, the infection rate started going up again. So
right, the wrong time.
Wrong time. So there's not really much opportunity.
Well, I do think that there's some universality to like there being a seasonal thing in terms of like attendance numbers, but I think it may be more in Switzerland than it is in other places. That kind of, because I know that when I was
because summer's freaking short.
She was saying like she really would always do like courses, like it wasn't like you had just classes going drop in year round. Like they would do it seasonally because that's when everybody showed up. Yeah,
unfortunately, then everybody started doing it drop in year round and
messed it all up for the rest of you. Huh? But that's the thing. It's so interesting to me because I know we also have some like shared, I read that you spent time in New York. Is that right?
Yes, which is why I love your podcast, because I listen to these people that some of them Mel from Yoga High and people like that.
So when were you there? When were you in New York?
I was in New York. I spent the whole year in New York in 2007, which is like ages ago, mostly for my dance training. But I was so exhausted from dancing that I ended up in yoga classes. And that was a huge revelation to actually have someone tell me, oh, you can listen to your body. You don't have to force it all the time. No, here, take a block. I was like, wow.
It's nice that you happened into that class because there's a lot of other classes in New York that were not saying that.
Absolutely.
Where did you go? What was your spot?
Well, I was in dance school, and there was this one teacher that is still a friend. Her name is Marie Perry. She has like her own institute now, but she was trained. She trained at Yoga, and she came very much from, that
Sure.
mindset, Buddhist, very anatomy based, and also somewhat, very therapeutic. And so through her, I ended up at Om. And then after a year, I sort of didn't want to prolong my visa. I couldn't work without a green card. So I was living off my savings. So I decided to come back to Switzerland. And then I just kept going back to New York every summer for several years. And in 2009, I did my first teacher training at Yoga. And then, got certified and came back to Switzerland and started teaching. And then, just visited frequently.
Yes, well, that was quite an institution, Om Yoga. Some people listening might not know about. I mean, Cindy Lee was on the show way back when. We talked about when it closed down. Oh my God!
Oh my God!
When that happened, I don't even remember what year that was.
I wasn't around, but it's still really sad to me that place is gone. But that's been a great blessing with this, U.S. lockdown, because some of my teachers, the guys that founded Now Yoga, like the four main guys, Cindy's main guys, they're still teaching in New York, and they're teaching online now, so I can actually practice with them, which is lovely.
See, I mean, I guess there's little alignings there. I've had that happen too, where people have been doing practice with me online that hadn't before. That is a good thing about that. That is a good thing that you can connect with those folks. So I guess that kind of does bring me to some of the other stuff. Like even you were just saying how first people in Switzerland would schedule their classes according to the seasons because that's what made the most sense. But then somebody decided to do year-round drop-in classes and mess it up for everybody. That same thing kind of has happened in all kinds of ways. In terms of like the way yoga centers were sort of operating back when Om Yoga was doing its thing, and the way they ended up operating when everybody switched over to membership models. That was one of those things where once people started doing memberships, there was sort of that like they messed it up for everybody. thing. And it just sort of kind of was that progression. And I know I felt like other places in the world when I was traveling, it was happening there too, but like it hadn't happened as much yet.
Yes, like I believe I wrote that to you. Like I feel like Switzerland is always like, or Europe maybe is always like a few steps behind. Like a lot of things that we've seen happen in the US are happening here, although it's a different culture and to some extent it's a different mindset. Like I can also point out that, for instance, the Groupon disaster that happened in the US, we didn't have that as much here. Like there was like a Groupon phase, but then that's maybe where we're culturally different. Like Swiss people are very loyal. If you find a place or a teacher that you like, you stick to that. So there are some differences, but overall, there's a lot of things that are evolving in the same way. Like for instance, it's just a huge market. Like there's so many teachers. So you can always find a junior teacher that will teach for half the rate. And so you hire that person instead of the senior teacher. That's just like, what? Like I have like 10 or 20 years of training on my back. I won't do it.
See, but that means that you've had the proliferation of the teacher trainings.
Yes, we've had that too. Absolutely. Yeah.
So, because that becomes part of the model, because you can charge thousands of dollars for a teacher training instead of $100 like for a workshop.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's like everywhere in the world, teacher trainings are everybody's bread and butter.
Now, maybe I got like a little bit of a different view because I was hanging out with Suzanne and she's a little bit of a maverick, I think. But it seemed to me like, and I also read that you were teaching some classes like out of like a town hall that you were renting. It did seem to me that there was still a spirit of like the independent teacher renting out a space or teaching out of their living room there. Is that inaccurate of me to think that?
No, it's not entirely inaccurate because that's kind of what I've gone back to doing. Yeah. I've had I wouldn't say a large scale yoga studio, but like a two space yoga studio with two business partners for 3 years. And it wasn't a very healthy dynamic between the three of us. And so I left, and now I've gone back to renting a small space and just doing my own thing, being my own boss, enjoying that very, very much, and seeing that it actually works. Like, I'm attracting exactly those people that, look for what I have to offer and actually benefit from that. I don't have the kind of pressure of having to make a huge rent, so I can really do whatever makes my heart sing and be like, okay, this is what I'm doing. If you like it, fine. If you don't have to come. And so yeah, I've kind of found my freedom again. And there's still, as you said, like I have in my neighborhood, there's an Iyengar teacher who's been teaching for I think 30 years, and he still teaches in a basement that he rents. It's really cold and not pretty, but he has a big following.
That's right. See, but that's exactly what I'm talking about. And you said it just now. You said, I found my freedom. And that's a really interesting thing. I when I let go of my center, I had a similar process. First, I taught at other centers because that's what I knew.
Me too.
And there are still reasons to do that potentially. I'm not ruling that out. I'm not saying centers are bad. You shouldn't teach at centers. But if you think of yoga as being sort of your primary thing, and you are looking to maybe have that be how you earn a living, I guess there's some debate whether that's possible right now.
Oh yes.
But I managed to do it to some degree, and I know other people who do. So, I mean, it's not a lot of people who are able to, but there are some people I know who are able to. But if that is your intention, then you absolutely have to have your own thing too. And your relationship to centers, therefore, has to be different. If that makes sense.
Yeah. And well, actually, I'd be interested in hearing how you experienced that. Because before I had my own business with these two other women, I was teaching in different centers and enjoying that very much. And then after that, I went back to, teaching in different centers. And I realized, and I don't mean to sound conceited, but I realized there's the maturity that I've, reached or established, or there was just this point where I felt like I needed space to be creative. And when you're teaching for center, there's always, even if they're letting you do your thing, you always have to adapt a little bit. Even just, the time slot that they give you to teach. You can't say, I want, 6 p.m. Wednesday night. They're like, oh no, but that's, Amber's class and we can't take it from her. La, 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 la. Yeah. So that's another reason why I did that.
Well, I totally know what you mean in terms of that feeling like maybe a center is actually not the right place for me to be. Because I started to get this feeling of my class was different than all of the other classes there. And they never knew what to call it. So first they called me slow flow. And then they called me mindful movement. They just never knew what to call me. And so, and I just got a feeling at a certain point where, I don't know, the people like you said, who really, I think, are interested and benefit from what I'm doing, weren't the people that were coming to my class at those centers.
Interesting.
And it started to feel like it made more sense to see if I could.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.